There's a recent talk I gave that covers a lot of health topics, metabolic syndrome, fatty liver disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, a lot of other areas as well. I hope you like it.
This was probably the most difficult slide to put together for me, health statistics, because there's some things up here. I mean, I could probably fill 4 or 5 slides with what's going on out there in the U.S. This is some rather dramatic stuff, and not anything that we've ever seen before, honestly, in the last 500-600 years. Probably because our supply chain is changing so drastically, and the toxins that are getting into our environment are coming from all different directions. Okay? So 30% of Americans have NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That's 1 in 3 people. 6 million are children. We've never seen that before. Okay? Silent killer, that's what the physicians call it, because there's no nerve endings in the liver. All right, so they're not aware of it. Pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, 100 million. That's a huge number. 88% of those folks don't know what they have either. And those two numbers are almost identical. Why? Because when your liver's not functioning correctly, it can't process everything within that blood glucose metabolism. It's the one sending the signal to your pancreas to secrete insulin. It's the one that's monitoring insulin glucose levels. It's the one pulling sugar back. It's the one releasing sugar. So if the liver's not operating correctly, are you going to have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetic? You probably are. Okay? So there's a lot of overlap. Since the 1970s, obesity has doubled. 50% of Americans have a chronic disease. That's huge. This stuff, I pulled this from the CDC. And a physician, a very well-known progressive physician who just came out with a new book, Unconventional Medicine. I'd strongly promote that book. Dr. Chris Kresser. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe you haven't. A very well-respected physician in the sort of alternative progressive category. Of the 50% of Americans that have chronic disease, half of those have multiple chronic diseases. 30% of children have a chronic disease. That's just incredible. 2005, UC San Diego did a study of 17 to 18-year-olds. Found 23% of them have NAFLD. Okay? Hispanics are twice as likely, probably is related somewhat genetically to PNPLA3. I won't get too much into that, but that essentially is driving regulation of triglycerides in the body. Liver cancer is the second leading cancer in the world behind lung cancer. Fatty liver drastically increases cardiac death. We know that. Men are twice at risk of this as women are. 2040, healthcare will be 100% of the U.S. budget. I think something's going to change before 2040. It better. Anybody have any questions? Anybody shocked by any of this stuff? This is shocking. All right. So I have my own feeling about what the causes are. All right? I'd like to just take a quick poll. Anybody have their own thoughts and opinions about why we're having this health epidemic? What are the main drivers? Yeah. Processed food, big time, yeah. Oh. Throw it out there. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. No, I totally agree. Yeah. These are the top 4 that, in my opinion, but you could very easily replace them with any of the others that are just mentioned. GMO foods, that's a huge one. Okay, so I can get into the molecular genetics of why GMO is bad, just from a standpoint of introducing viral and bacterial DNA, and not exactly knowing where within the gene you are inserting this and what the outcome is. What you consume, you will become. Okay, and if you're not, the bacteria that consume it will. And we're 10 to 1 bacteria to human cells. So if we start changing around the microflora, what do you think is going to happen to us? Every single disease I can pinpoint back to a bacteria that's in imbalance. Just about every one of them. And that's to say nothing of glyphosate and its impact on breaking down not only the microbiome, pitting the stomach with leaky gut, and then traveling to the liver and inhibiting some really important cytochromes, P450 cytochromes, which are critically important in detoxification. Increased antibiotic use. And anytime I give this talk to physicians, they immediately start screaming, but antibiotic use is down. Yeah, scripts are down. The antibiotic use in this country, 75% of it is animals. Okay, so we're consuming it. We're not getting it via CVS and Walgreens anymore. Personal care products, of course, have been becoming immensely toxic. Never in a health food store, though, which I like. And then the MTHFR gene mutation. And that's one that is not coming up on too many people's radar, but I have a feeling when people become aware of what this gene mutation does, is created, how it's created, this will be a standard test probably in 5 or 6 years. Does anybody know what the MTHFR gene does or is? Okay, all right. We'll get a little further into this, but that's good. If you know it, great. If you don't, it's okay. We'll talk about it. All right. Pathology, metabolic syndrome. I know a lot of you probably already know this is going to be pretty much standard background for you guys, but breakdown of the microbiome, and this, of course, when we're talking about consuming too many antibiotics, you end up basically sterilizing the digestive tract. All those good friendly bacteria go away. The opportunistic ones end up coming in. A lot of times you'll end up seeing this with individuals who come in and they say that I've got IBS, I've got SIBO, I've got celiac disease, I've got all of these things. Some of that's genetic. A lot of it is due to antibiotics, NSAIDs, GMOs, sugars, and carbohydrates. Okay, just a quick note on the fact side of this. About 100 years ago, we were consuming an average of somewhere between 7 to 8 pounds of sugar annually per person. Now, it's 138 to 142, somewhere in that range. So this is going to drastically change. If you're feeding opportunistic things that like sugar and carbohydrates, they're going to grow very rapidly. Okay? That's going to create a problem. So what ends up happening when you get this breakdown of the microbiome? You end up with leaky gut. You have some of these toxins that come in. They further degrade the tissue area down there. It's just like the skin on the back of your hand. Okay? You have epithelial cells. These epithelial cells are anchored by desmosomes. Okay? It's sort of the mortar that keeps them together. You have things like candida, which are very opportunistic. And when they're in high concentrations, they start to secrete aldehydes. And aldehydes break the desmosomes. They break those connections. They start to break down soft tissue. Those are holes. Okay? And what ends up happening at that point, things start to flood in the body where they didn't normally do so before. So what was once a sort of a selective barrier is now no longer. Those friendly bacteria that were communicating with you and breaking down things and creating nice nutrition and then telling you to open up those J channels in between epithelial cells, that's not happening anymore. So you get malnourished and you get toxins into your body all at one time. That's a big problem. Okay? So how does the body react to this? Well, they start to see all of these toxins and foreign materials in your body. It starts to create an immune response. Okay? And over time, your body does not like to be in an active immune response. Okay? It's damaging, it's aging, and so forth. So your body starts to secrete cortisol to tamp down your immune response. Now, you still have leaky gut, so you still have these things coming into your body. Cortisol is getting pumped out. Cortisol has impacts on other things within the body. That's going to lead to some conversation later on in this talk, why that's a bad thing. So when these foreign materials are streaming into the body, these could be organisms, could be partially digested food, could be virus, all these things. Once they bypass the immune system, and that happens relatively quickly, the liver is really your last sort of defense. Your liver will circulate, all the blood ends up circulating through your liver about 7 times your entire, the total amount of blood in your system circulates through your liver 7 times per day. Okay, so it's definitely going to catch a lot of this stuff. And what ends up happening is if the liver becomes overwhelmed, it goes through two processes. Phase one is called subtraction. It identifies what's coming into the body and says, okay, this thing, I can pull this off and I can use it. This is a vitamin or an amino acid or something like that. This other thing is way too toxic, don't know what it is. Phase two will take care of that. That's called conjugation. Okay, it's a handoff, but they are not connected. So one can go all day, phase one can go all day, phase two not so much. So phase one is creating all these very highly oxidized toxins within the body, and they have a tendency to concentrate within the liver, which creates big problems. If phase two gets overwhelmed and it can't go through those detoxification phases, your glutathione replenishment is an issue, your methylation is an issue, your acetylation is an issue. These things have a tendency to create lots of damage within the body. The body reacts to this, and it says, all right, we'll create a fat cell, we'll store it for later. Okay? So your body is very advanced biotechnology. Problem is that the fat cells end up concentrating at a very high rate if you end up taking in a lot of toxins, and that's creating a problem for the liver. Okay? And your genetics are going to determine whether those fat cells stay just within the liver or outside the liver, on your hips, on your thighs, and all the other places. So you can't look at an individual and say, well, he or she's kind of skinny, can't possibly have fatty liver disease. That's not how it works. Okay? So anybody have any questions about that? Pretty straightforward. Probably a review for some of you. Patient profile. I'm not going to go too deep into this. Again, a lot of this stuff is in the handout that I gave you, so you don't have to scribble wildly, and I can send out this PowerPoint to you. But in the GI tract, we're talking about white tongue, skin and nail infections, athlete's foot, constipation, yeast infection, sugar cravings, UTI. All right, you've seen those before, right? In the liver, elevated liver enzymes. Not a whole lot of people get that test, but that's one of the indicators. Type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetic, chronic fatigue, abdominal pain, yellowish eyes, fluid retention, no symptoms. No symptoms. That's a big problem. And deficiencies in B12, iron, and vitamin D, and I can tell you why that happens. And then there are some shared ones between the two. God bless. And then we have some diseases that end up creeping up here too. Autoimmune diseases, HASHIMOTO'S, all kinds of things with the thyroid, depression, so forth. And depression has, by and large, been connected with this change in the microbiome. So if you don't have a lot of friendlies, well, let me get into this, because I think I have it on another slide. All right. So liver function. Just again, this is just a quick review. Converts energy for the body. That means it has the ability to break down fats, proteins, and carbohydrates into energy. Stores all your fat-soluble vitamins. Stores minerals. Is a secretor of your sex hormones. Along with your kidneys, helps to maintain your blood pressure. Heart, obviously, it's very critical in that. So, it's the organ that breaks down cholesterol, alcohol, drugs, and caffeine. Bones, it helps to facilitate the absorption of vitamin D, phosphorus, and calcium. It's obviously the major detox center, so if you've got a lot of toxins in your body, it means your liver is not doing its job very well. And it helps to break down ammonia, which is really important. So when we talk about this dysbiosis that takes place in the digestive tract, all the friendlies are sort of moved out. You have these sort of deleterious things that are moving in, especially bacteria. These are typically gram-negative. They start to secrete a lot of ammonia. So the friendly bacteria, what were they doing? They were helping excuse me, to facilitate the absorption of iron. They also create vitamins like vitamin K. These guys, they move in and they start secreting ammonia because they're eating up all your amino acids. Okay? And that's a major problem. And the best kind of environment to grow these guys are a neutral environment. So if you have a lot of acid in your stomach, a nice pH of 5 or something like that, they're really not going to grow all that well. Okay? But if you start to have heartburn issues, if you start to not be able to get your stomach acid to a nice low pH, these guys flourish. And you start to create a lot of ammonia. It starts to go into your blood system, crosses the blood-brain barrier, starts to inhibit neural function within the synaptic cleft. People end up coming in and saying, boy, I just don't feel myself. I feel like I'm in a fog. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Any questions about that? So the bacteria are eating up the proteins that are coming into the system. Yeah. So you're not getting those nice proteins. You're not getting the iron as a byproduct of that consumption that they're feasting on. They end up secreting ammonia. Not a good equation for for a healthy individual. Hashimoto's. I know everybody in this room probably knows what it is, but I'm going to go over it just a little bit. It's an autoimmune disease of the thyroid. For the most part. I mean, there are certainly genetic components, but it's really an autoimmune issue. So here's some of the most recent medical research when it comes to Hashimoto's. Some of the causes: genetic, toxicity, leaky gut. Okay, and it's also implicated in fibromyalgia. So what's happening here is very interesting. So when you have leaky gut, things are getting across that gut lining that weren't before. There's something in science we call molecular mimicry. And that's when there are substances that the immune system will identify, but they look like something else in the body. And that becomes a real problem. So here's 3 things that end up coming through that were once in the lumen of the digestive tract and would never access the body before. Now you have leaky gut. It's crossing over Epstein-Barr, H. pylori, and Yersinia. Okay? Those things to the immune system, they look like thyroid tissue. So they start battling these guys at the site of attack down in your gut, and then they go to your thyroid, and they start breaking down tissue in there. That's a serious problem. And the individual, again, this is some controversy as to whether or not this is genetic or nutritional or whatever, may end up going hyper or hypo. Okay? So the other thyroid tissue may really kick it into high gear, and you may end up going in that direction, or the rest of the thyroid tissue is just kind of maintaining, and it's it's basically losing effectiveness, and you go into hypo. So it really, one direction or another, it really depends. And sometimes it fluctuates on a weekly basis, okay, which is why a lot of these people are all over the place. Most tests for this look at TSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone, T3, T4, and then they stop. And this is kind of a problem. They don't test for the antithyroid antibody test, which would show up that this is a Hashimoto's issue. So T3, T4, neither of them fail immediately. They're lagging indicators. If somebody has this issue, best thing to do, give them some selenium and ashwagandha. That helps with those individuals. But again, if this is a leaky gut issue, if this is a inflammation molecular mimicry issue, that is you're only putting a Band-Aid on the problem. Okay? Fibromyalgia, more or less the same stuff. Immune system is overstimulated, lots of toxins floating around the body, the liver isn't properly functioning, you've got an open gut, the stuff is continuously coming in. So what do? They put you on NSAIDs. NSAIDs make the gut issue much worse. All right, so now they're on a sort of a spiral, and eventually they get to the point where this negatively impacts their cardiac system, and they put them on statins. And holy smoke, I can't help you at that point. You're in real trouble. Okay, they've got you addicted. That's the way they want you. Hate to say it, but so that's something you clearly want to avoid. All right, so yes. Yeah. Right, yeah, right. So the doctors are all like, look, we really don't want to give this to you, but we're going to give this to you. And what you're starting to see is a huge increase in the incidence of cognitive decline and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And yes, there are other factors, no doubt about it. But if you starve the body of fatty acids, what do you think that those neurons are firing off of? They're insulated myelin sheaths. So if you don't replenish and repair and increase the amount of fatty acids in your body, they're going to degrade to the point where they're unusable. And that's where they're at. So thank you. And also obviously negatively impacts your entire endocrine system because all your hormones run off of fats. That's what they are. So inflammation, cortisol secretion, One of the things that cortisol ends up doing, in addition to suppressing the immune system, is that it starts to suppress TSH, which has a negative impact on your metabolism. So your whole metabolism slows down as a result of this. Okay, so we know we have digestive issues. Now your digestion is slowing down. So things that were before didn't have access to, say, your upper GI tract, now they can gain access to it, like C. diff. You know, that's a big one. Doctors constantly calling us, well, we got another patient who has a C. diff dysbiosis. All right, yeah, well, we know what that is. Your digestion is slowing down. You got this inflammation, chronic inflammation thing. Your cortisol is all over the place. Okay? That's how you get the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO. All right. SIBO risk factors. These are the top ones here. Multiple courses of antibiotics. I think we all kind of understand that. Low stomach acid. So let me explain the low stomach acid for a second, because I bet you get a lot of people, if they're sort of in this category, they say, look, I'm on, you know, the purple pill, and I have heartburn, and, you know, my doctor tells me I'm not producing enough acid. So he gives you a pill to reduce the acid? I see. Okay, that makes sense. So what is typically going on here is that you first have a breakdown in the microbiome. You have that tissue that's in disrepair, right? That's creating an environment where those bacteria that you don't want, these deleterious bacteria, are coming up from the large intestine, going into the small intestine, and now they're getting access to the stomach. And what your stomach does is it starts to not produce as much acid. Okay? There's a number of reasons number of factors for this. The stomach, A, recognizes that the tissue is damaged in your small intestine. Your body is an incredibly smart organism. Okay? So it's not going to secrete as much acid as it was before, because it knows that those cells, those epithelial cells that are damaged, were secreting mucus to basically act as a shield against the acid. So it's not there anymore. I'm not going to create acid because I'm just going to destroy my own tissue. So the acid starts to get more neutral. The bacteria ends up gaining access to the stomach. Okay? This is how you get ulcers and that kind of stuff too. Of course, stress has a major impact on this. So when the stomach acid becomes more neutral, the esophageal sphincter only engages when the stomach acid is low enough. You're not hitting that anymore. So that sphincter is wide open. So stuff can go up and down and up and down. It's heartburn. So what do? They give you the purple pill to do what? Make it more neutral so it won't hurt your esophagus. Bad decision. Yep.
Well, 20 or so years ago, military, I think actually, they had diagnosed me with acid reflux.
Yep.
And then after I, went into combat, came back down to the auto, my stress levels, PTSD, et cetera.
Yeah.
Several years later, I went in and I was diagnosed with both hiatal hernia and esophagitis
Mm-hmm.
because of that. And
Sure.
if anybody doesn't realize, there's the stomach lining cells are very, very interesting. Those are actually one of the few cells in your body that are still in that state that they can mutate. And
Yes,
so
that's true.
what can happen is it can literally, and this is what increases your chances for esophageal and stomach cancers, is what can happen is those esophageal cells actually can start to mutate into digestive stomach lining cells.
That's
and
right.
that increases your rate of cancer because it's in a process of mutation. And that's why those numbers go up. And,
Yeah.
luckily I got it under control, and between diet change and exercise.
Excellent.
And you can actually correct minor
Yeah.
variations in that hiatal by, massage therapy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But once that stuff starts to open up, you're literally looking at a drastic increase in stomach cancer,
Yeah.
fetal cancer, just from that.
Yeah.
And being on the purple pills long term is actually what caused it.
Right. Thank you for your service, by the way. That was an excellent dissertation on that. That was good. I appreciate that. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yep.
And if you have any case study out which shows that those were never designed for long-term solutions, and that anybody who's been on those
Yes.
so years are now affecting cognitive function?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so when I used to go, this is a great point because this dovetails into this. When I used to go to physician conferences 10 years ago, I'd say probably about 10 to 15% of the conversations were about bacteria. Now, completely flipped. Almost every disease they're talking about now in medicine is got its relation back to bacteria. So, to your point, you know. Okay. Let's see. So low stomach acid, moderate alcohol consumption. Yeah, I mean, that's always been there, but that really is not a driving force. Oral contraceptives, NSAIDs. NSAIDs are big. NSAIDs are big. You heard about bowel syndrome, celiac disease, Crohn's disease. You get the picture over there on the SIBO risk factors. Common SIBO symptoms, gas and belching, constipation, abdominal pain, discomfort, bloating, abdominal distension, diarrhea, severe weight loss. That's basically vitamin deficiencies. So a lot of people that say, well, I don't eat this or that, or I constantly have chronic back pain, stuff like that. Listen, if your stomach is distended this way, but you've got your spine on this side, keeping it all in, okay? Now you're pushing on your spine. Every individual over the age of probably 19 has a problem with their spine. It's compression. It's just a matter of time. But is it pressing on a nerve? Okay? Once this starts distending outwards and in the other direction, that's when you end up getting that kind of chronic back pain. So if people would just go on the proper diet, I'm not saying in every case, back issues are very complex. A lot of people will get away from this pain. Questions about this? All right. This is a neat little trick. This is why I asked if anyone was from the pharmaceutical industry here. IBD versus IBS. Inflammatory bowel disease versus irritable bowel syndrome. All right, so IBD is sort of defined as typically present in 2 or more diseases, typically colitis and Crohn's, okay? And it causes tissue damage. Of course we're talking about tissue damage. Everything I've told you is about tissue damage. Every time you change the microbiome, you're probably going to get tissue damage. Okay? IBS, mostly present in large intestine, doesn't cause tissue damage like IBD. Can you give me, for instance, a dysbiosis, something going wrong with your digestive tract that doesn't cause some sort of tissue damage? So clearly the pharmaceutical company sees this as a big problem, and they don't want us getting involved in their solutions. Okay? Well, you're going to have to put me out of business for one thing. So this makes it a disease that's only to be addressed by big pharma and not naturally. It's taking it out of our hands. Fortunately, they don't have a test for that. So they can't determine for sure, which is good for us. So that's sort of the overview of what's going on from a pathological standpoint and some of the trends that at least I see out there. So one of the things that we started to do is we started to make products that offset these things. Hepatibin was the first product we came out with. It's formulated for both leaky gut and liver detoxification. So half of the ingredients are dedicated to leaky gut repair, and the other half are dedicated to that phase 2 conjugation that we're talking about within the liver. So methylation, glutathione, replenishment, acetylation, that kind of stuff. Originally we had SAMe in here. We took it out, and we put turmeric in there. SAMe doesn't react very well with about 1 to 2% of the population out there that are on psychotropics. So that was an issue. If you have a digestive issue, the likelihood of you being on a psychotropic goes up quite a bit. So that was a whole segment that we couldn't help. So we took that out. So what makes us a little bit different here, it's the concentration of actives, and it's the combination. So, for instance, any milk thistle type product should always have choline in it because it increases its effectiveness about 2 to 3 times over. So right here we have silibin, which is the active of milk thistle. Depending upon what time of year you go out and you pick milk thistle, that could be 2 to 10 to 15% activity. Well, we don't want that fluctuation. So we got silibin, we got the active. Okay? We put phosphatidylcholine in there to increase its activity beyond that. So this is sort of equivalent to about 6,000 milligrams of straight-up milk thistle because of the choline piece. MSM, NAC. NAC is kept on emergency rooms for individuals who come in with drug overdoses to make sure that their livers don't fail on them. Okay? Let's see. Turmeric, of course, is good for anything. In this case, we're doing it for inflammation and for liver health. Okay? So you'll see a lot of times you'll see turmeric in there with black pepper or pepperin. Okay? So we clearly are not going to be doing that, and there's a reason. They both have their applications. Well, one is going to be doing liver health, and the other one's going to be reducing inflammation throughout the body. So what black pepper or pepperin itself does is it goes into the body, and it says, okay, you have to be able, thank you, you have to be able to tag a toxin for it to be recognized and go into phase 2 within the liver and be detoxified. Okay? Black pepper removes the tag. Okay, so if we put that in here, you wouldn't be able to get any beneficial liver effects on that. But if you take turmeric with the black pepper in it, okay, it's not going to be detoxifying the liver. It'll be circulating in the blood because the body can't tag it. If the body can't tag it, turmeric is circulating and it's able to hit those joints. Yeah?
No, I read that 6 months ago and last soup or whatever, and I put the pepper in the turmeric. You actually turmeric. So what
Yeah.
I read, so that's not good.
Well, it depends on what you're after. If you've got body aches and pains, you just played 4 hours of tennis and that's what you want, hey, cool, do that. That's perfectly fine. But if you are looking at this fatty liver issue, then it's probably not a good application. Yep.
Well, some of the stuff that I have read was that when you enhance stuff with pepper, especially if you have somebody that is not really regimental about their supplement protocol, anytime you add
Yep.
pepper to anything, that is going to increase digestive availability. And if they're already suffering from any type of leaky gut, anything within their stomach can cross that barrier, and then that may actually make that cortisol response worse. So, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of a trade-off. Yes, pepper can enhance certain things if that's the only thing that you're ingesting at the time.
Yeah.
But if you've got, something from leftover from last night still sitting around in there, you've got slow digestion and you don't want to add, you don't want the KFCs going right through,
Right. Good point. Yeah. And that I think that let me pull this back for a second because you make a very interesting point, and that is when somebody is full on reacting to everything that's getting into their system because your inflammatory response is so high and the pores, these micropores in your digestive tract are so wide that everything is heading in, then everything is going to be reactive to your immune system. So what you have to do is you have to create a barrier first and repair the leaky gut. We deal with a lot of people who have fatty liver and Lyme disease, and there is a very regimented protocol and sequence to which you have to do things. You can't just throw oregano in there because they'll react to the oregano, even though that's good at reducing candida overgrowth. So there's a sequence to it, and that's a very good point.
I did have a question as far as this is going.
Yeah.
And as you go through these, can you address the safety as far as pregnancy?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So this is sort of like the third rail of our industry. Can it be taken by someone who's pregnant or breastfeeding and all that stuff? I can only tell you it would take a lot of money to do the studies. I haven't really seen a whole lot of studies where they introduce this to somebody who's in that situation. My wife took it, but that's anecdotal. So I have to sit here and say, call up a physician and all that stuff, which, by the way, they won't know what the heck we're talking about, but that's all right. No, they won't. Yeah. But I can't come up here and say that, this is okay for it either. But I will tell you that I gave it to my wife. And I like her, so. All right. At any rate. Berberine used for everything. Every doctor I've ever talked to uses it for type 2 diabetes, for inflammation, and it helps things. But specifically, we're using it more or less for the epithelial cell wall. Okay. Glutathione, it's enteric-coated. It's not doing anything for the liver. I know a lot of people think that that's what it's for. It's not doing that. Again, this is helping to repair the epithelial wall. Alpha-lipoic acid, a little bit of both here. Okay. So these are symbiotic ingredients. And they've got quite a bit of overlap. This is a new product for us. So what was happening was we were pushing out the hepatidin to the physicians, and the physicians were coming back and they're saying, great, as far as the tests are concerned, the liver enzymes are dropping, the cholesterol is dropping. So the product is doing what it was supposed to do. Excellent. But some of these people have really severe leaky gut issues. they have candida overgrowth, they've got biofilm, they have a tissue that is really degraded. So we ended up coming up with something that will address this. It's got, and we just came out with this last month. This is already our #1 selling product. Essentially what's happened, this is the product that I was giving to my wife when she had thrush. Now, she loves sugars and carbohydrates, big time. So I can't get her to stop, Coffee, donut, whatever. If she was here, she'd be yelling at me, 'cause don't tell people that. I'm a little bit more of a purist. But, so she had thrush, very painful. She was on this product, Candida Complex, which is very effective, especially in clinical settings. Wasn't doing it for her. She'd feel better for a few days, and then it would go back. So I ended up giving her supplements were very close to this, and it went away. It went away, and it didn't return. So I figured, okay, this is what we have to do. This is what the physicians were asking for. So what this does is it supports mucosal secretion, epithelial cell repair, and tight junction health. Okay? It does this with a number of ingredients here, which I'll go into in a second. Anti-inflammatory, GI tract repair, and autoimmune reduction, mast cell suppression. So when you're dealing with damaged tissue, one of the things that you want to reduce right away are mast cells to the site of the inflammation, because those cells are releasing histamines. It's bringing attention to the immune system, and they're going to come in, and it's going to be a battle royale. And you don't want that, because that becomes essentially an autoimmune issue. So quercetin, in my opinion, in research, we've been able to identify as the best at sort of reducing mast cell activity. Okay, so we no longer have that autoimmune issue anymore. Zinc, very good at closing gaps. Okay, excellent, especially with individuals with celiac. You can read the research on that. It's been very effective. MSM, again, very good epithelial cell wall repair. Licorice root, more or less the same thing. N-acetyl glucosamine, that's going to help you start to secrete your own mucus again, okay? Which is super important, because that's going to create that barrier so that those deleterious organisms don't end up battling with your tissue and those desmosome anchor points anymore. Okay? So this has been pretty effective. Candida Complex. This is a little bit different than a lot of the stuff on the market. It's got the oregano in there. It's got the caprylic acid. That's pretty standard. It has your protease and your cellulase in there. That's pretty standard. It does back in with probiotics. If you end up pushing these guys off the field, you probably should have something in there so that they don't move back in. And then it also has black walnut hulls and wormwood. And that does a couple of things. We're still battling the candida at multiple metabolic pathways, but the additional benefit to this is it's anti-parasitic. So you get those other parasites as well. So you're hitting a large swath of what can go wrong in the digestive tract. All right.
What's the suggested length of use on that?
Yeah. So because oregano is probably, and caprylic acid to a certain extent, probably the two that you would not want to be on in large doses for long periods of time, because it can create damage. We've put them in conjunction with other ingredients, and we've put individuals on this. The physician's protocol for this is 3 to 4 months, sort of mandatory. Okay, so that gives you some idea, and there hasn't been negative consequences of that. I call this the cheat pill. So if you go out, you have pizza, you have cake, or whatever, you've got this in your medicine cabinet, you take it afterwards. If you feed them, try to kill them, so they don't cause the problem later on. Let's see, serrapeptase. So anybody have experience with serrapeptase in the past? This is a cool enzyme. Yeah, I think it's the strongest naturally occurring enzyme in nature. A lot of studies end up proving that. So serrapeptase has a lot of different uses. In this case, originally, the physicians were coming to us and they're saying, look, this microbiome issue is mostly candida. It's partially parasites, it's partially virus, but it's also biofilm. And so to that extent, I was like, well, what's biofilm? I'm not quite sure what that is myself. And that's sort of a grouping of mucus and metals and virus and all kinds of things that you don't want in your system. And alone, your regular immune system, your IgA, can get rid of it in the lumen. But when it starts to congregate especially with heavy metal, they form double bonds, and so you need an enzyme to break it up. And this biofilm typically sits right in between those epithelial cell wall. They're right in the tight junctions, so they'll pop them open. That's leaky gut, so you got to get rid of it. But you don't need much of this. So month's supply, probably perfectly fine for another 12 months. Okay? So you don't need to be taking this all the time. But here's the caveat to this. Serrapeptase is really good at breaking down scar tissue. You're going to have scar tissue in your liver when it's not functioning properly and you're damaging it. So if we're doing a fatty liver type of cleanse and we're reducing the toxins in the liver, we want to be able to reduce the scar tissue in there too so that hepatic cells can regrow. And they do regrow. Your liver is one of the most remarkable organs in its ability to regrow its own cells. So, let's see. And I can tell you that we get this from a very special source out in India. They only support pharmaceutical industry. I told you I was in the pharmaceutical industry before this, so I had some contacts. This is the cleanest serrapeptase you'll find. There's a doctor in Connecticut, a Dr. Gregory Austin. He has all kinds of scar tissue. He's been into an accident years ago. He says he's tried everything on the market. This is the only thing that works for him. I don't know. I'll take his word for it, I suppose. Sugar balance. I'll tell you that I think this product is great. Of course I'm going to say that. Okay? But I'm also going to tell you this is a Band-Aid. I don't promote it because if they have sugar issues, they have liver issues. I don't really want them taking this unless they have to. Long-term, short-term insulin, if they're trying to subsidize or trying to use a product that's natural versus those synthetic things, because the excipients in the insulin that they're jamming into their bodies are terrible. They are petroleum-based. They create all kinds of toxins. It's a big problem. So if they want to put them on sugar balance instead of those things in the meantime while they fix their liver, that's cool with me. I don't want this as a long-term solution.
So basically somebody comes in, the doctor said that my sugar levels weren't too bad, but they put me on this metformin so that
Right.
expiratory glucose medication.
Right.
I really don't want to take this. This is a suggestion.
Yes. Yeah. So naturopaths and functionals and integratives that work with us, they put them on this stuff rather than reaching for metformin. Yeah. Yep.
Instead of the this.
Yes. The hepatibin, a leaky gut, sort of addressing that in some form or another with some form of combination of those products that we talked about. And worst case, their sugars are off the charts, throw in sugar balance in the meantime until they're better. All right. So more or less what we talked about before, Candida complex goes after the parasites, and Candida, serrapeptase goes after the biofilm. This combination has been very effective when we're talking about SIBO, talking about like C. diff and H. pylori and all those other things. So that's a good thing, obviously, and it reduces fibrous tissue. In combination with hepatibin, what you're doing is when these guys are dying off, they're dying off and they're not going quietly. Lots of endotoxins, exotoxins. Somebody ends up coming in and buying the product, and they'll come back 2 or 3 days later and they say, I feel like hell. I feel like I just came down with the flu. You're not drinking enough water, okay? And if you're taking a product like hepatibin, that's pre-clearing, pre-filtering the liver so those things aren't, taking over your body. They're not circulating at a very high dose. All right, so that's very helpful. MTHFR. So 30 to 40% of people are affected. This catches a lot of people by surprise because probably not just 5-6 years ago, they thought that this was closer to like 2 to 3%. But that was homozygous. In other words, it was completely and totally 100% MTHFR impacted. This methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase gene controls your methylation pathways. So, okay, so my methylation pathways are screwed up. What does that impact? 150 different compounds. 150 different compounds are required in your body to methylate in order for them to operate properly. So that will impact cognition, removing toxins for sure, removing hormones, creating hormones. There's a lot of stuff that's impacted by that. Just B12. That's why everybody says, well, you should probably take a methylated B12. That's if you have this problem, you take anything other, it's not going to be very effective. So that's the reason. So if you, it's a very good indicator. If you take B12 and then you take methylated B12 and you see a difference, you better check for this gene. Not only that, but I've read recently, of course these studies are done outside the U.S. They would never be done inside the U.S. I've read that this gene is negatively impacted by glyphosate. So if you don't have this gene mutation at birth, if you eat enough GMO foods, you might just get it. So that's a sort of a scary thing. Successful supplementation. A lot of people with the MTHFR gene mutation take this product. Why? Because it helps with glutathione, methionine, cysteine, milk thistle, sulfur. We're talking about all those basic pathways in the phase 2 conjugation. Yeah?
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but a lot of some of the naturopaths that are working with some like cancer patients are recommending their yoga and diet to help with self-die off on cancer cells.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
So I mean, so it's one of those.
Yeah.
We fix the liver, which could boost the immune
Yep.
response, or do we cut the methionine to decrease the cancer production?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, each case is specific. When we're talking about cancer, I have a tendency to believe that, you know, every cancer cell, their energy mechanisms are broken. So they can't break down fats and proteins and get energy. You starve the cell of energy, it doesn't do much. It dies eventually. So as long as you're not taking in carbohydrates and sugar, that should have a big effect. But you're right, that also has an impact. Yes. Let me see. Some of the things that people come in with. If they come in with a test result and they say, well, I don't have enough iron, my B12 is low, my vitamin D is low, you know, these are clear indications that the liver is not operating properly. Okay, you might have the MTHFR gene. Okay, that's a possibility. But people who have livers that don't function properly, they might have all the vitamin D they might have more vitamin D than anybody else in the room. Okay, but the problem is that what they're testing for is the active vitamin D. That's the hydroxy group vitamin D. And the only way that that attachment takes place is in the liver. So if the liver's not functioning properly, you don't have an active vitamin D. So you could take all the vitamin D supplements you want. You could sit in the sun. It doesn't matter. Okay? If the liver's not functioning properly, it's not going to work. So that's one of those things. So when doctors tell me they don't have enough high enough vitamin D, I say, look, have you tested the liver? No, I didn't. Okay, well, all right. Adrenal fatigue. I'm not a huge advocate. I'll have this conversation with you, but I'm not a huge advocate of you having a conversation with the end consumer on this, unless you want to, and the individual is highly educated. So we've finally gotten people to understand that there's something wrong with their endocrine system, and it's somewhat tied to their inflammatory response. It makes perfect sense, right? And I won't go over or belabor that point with you. But we don't ever experience adrenal fatigue. It doesn't exist. Okay? And this is something that we've just figured out a few years ago. But I'm not interested in re-educating everybody. I'm just glad that they're taking products for it, because there's an overlap. Okay? So what's really happening is an HPA axis dysfunction. Okay? And so when you look at the structure of the endocrine system, there's those 3 glands that are involved, and there's negative and positive feedback loops. And usually the negative feedback loop is cortisol. But of course, if you have massive chronic inflammation, that whole thing is going to get totally thrown off. And if you want to know how to solve this problem with specificity, you should probably pick up Dr. Nora Gagaudis' book, Rethinking Fatigue. She goes into it in great detail. And if you're not a biochemist before, you will be afterwards. But you'd have to test about 50, 60, 70 different neurotransmitters and precursors or whatever to figure out exactly what the problem is between these 3 glands that's throwing this whole thing into a tilt. Okay? I don't know, and nobody else is going to be diagnosing anyone on the floor of a health food store. So the nice thing about this is when you use adaptogenic herbs, They have a tendency to bring down the ones that are high and bring up the ones that are low. And so nature knows what to do. So again, I don't need to necessarily tell people, nah, it's not adrenal fatigue, it's HPA. Who cares? As long as they understand that there's a problem, they need to take something for it, that's perfectly fine. Okay? So we talked about the effects. This is hypothyroid and inflammation suppression. Cortisol reduces TSH. Okay, negatively impacts sleep and stress, which is a problem because if your sleep isn't negatively impacted, so this is what happens. At night, your liver is most active. Okay? The detoxification through your whole body is in a heightened state when you're asleep. The way in which you detoxify your brain, okay? At night, your brain actually starts to reduce, okay? And the lack of, I don't say a lack of swelling, but the reduction in brain tissue allows for the cerebral spinal fluid to get into those crevices and pull out the toxins and drop them into your metabolism to properly detoxify your body. And that really is going to be focused on your liver. So your liver is most active at night. So if you're sleepless, this is not going to work very well. So what was happening was we were getting these products out into the marketplace, and physicians were coming back and were saying, well, we just give them adaptogenic herbs, and the healing ended up going like 2 or 3 times faster. It's like, oh, yeah, right, that makes sense. Okay. So we ended up coming out with these 2 products, which is basically a nighttime, daytime adaptogenic adrenal support. We call it adrenal support. Hey, look, that's what the marketplace is asking for. But you have your magnesium in there. You have your B vitamins. Your B12 is methylated. Everything's organic that we could get our hands on. You got your ashwagandha in there. In the sleep product, we do not have melatonin. And there's a reason why we don't have melatonin in there. Any external source of melatonin is going to reduce your own supply of melatonin. You will become addicted. And you will be throwing off your whole endocrine system as a result. So we definitely don't want... I used to think, and the studies would back this years ago, as long as you were taking 2 to 3 milligrams or less, you're perfectly fine. You're cool. That's not the case. Any external source, your body will pick up on that, it'll try to equilibrate internally, and it'll start to decrease secretion. And for those of us who are spiritual, that comes from your pineal gland. You certainly don't